How much can one human being lose before they finally break? For Caleb Plant, the answer was everything. He buried his daughter on a Thursday and was back in the gym by Monday. Not because he was heartless, but because the rhythmic sound of the speedback was the only thing loud enough to drown out the silence of an empty crib. Most people see the flashy defense and their world titles. They don't see the man who had to go back and forth from the gym to the hospital just to keep his daughter's heart beating. This is the true story of a man who became a king while his world was ending. This is the story of Caleb Plant. Chapter 1: The Hollows of Tennessee. To understand a man, you have to understand the dirt he came from. Ashland City, Tennessee isn't the part of the state they put on the postcards. It's a place where the shadows of the Appalachian foothills stretch long over families trapped in a cycle of generational poverty. Caleb Plank grew up in a house that felt more like a cage. The walls were thin, the insulation was non-existent, and the fridge was often an empty box of white light. It was a childhood of not enough. Not enough food, not enough heat, not enough hope. His father, Richie Plant, was a man who knew the streets were waiting to swallow his son whole. The opioid epidemic was a huge plague in their neighborhood, turning childhood friends into ghosts and neighbors into statistics. Richie didn't have much, but he had a vision. He found a drafty, abandoned warehouse and filled it with the only things that he could afford: scrap metal, a used heavy bag, and a relentless discipline. There was no heater for the winter, no fan for the Tennessee humidity. Caleb grew up punching through the cold, his breath visible in the air, learning that if he wanted warmth, he had to fight for it. Every drop of sweat on that concrete floor was a payment towards a future he couldn't yet see. Chapter 2: A Father's Desperate Love. Richie Plant wasn't just a trainer, he was a lifeline. He worked double shifts, his body aching and his hands stained with grease, only to spend his remaining hours holding the mitts for Caleb. They were a team against the world. While other kids were out in parties and getting lost in the local drug scene, Caleb was in that warehouse. He was a kid with the hand-me-down shoes and a chip on his shoulder, the size of a state line. Boxing wasn't a hobby, it was a rescue mission. Every punch was a no to the life laid out for him. Every amateur tournament they traveled to was a gamble, spending gas money they didn't have. Sleeping in the car with the windows cracked and eating from fast food dollar menus just to get to the next bracket. This was the foundation of the Sweet Hands persona, a technical brilliance born from a desperate need to never go back to that cold warehouse. Chapter 3: The Arrival of Aaliyah. In 2013, it seemed like the sun was finally peeking through the clouds. Caleb was a hot prospect and he was about to become a father. When Aaliyah was born, Caleb felt a sense of purpose that the boxing ring could never provide. But the joy was shattered almost instantly. Doctor realized there was something terribly wrong. Aaliyah was born with an exceptionally rare medical condition, an unknown inflammation of the brain that caused a wildfire of seizures. At its worst, Aaliyah was suffering through over 200 seizures a day. Imagine being a young father, barely in your 20s, watching your infant daughter's body go rigid hundreds of times a day. You want to protect her from the world, but the world is inside her own head, attacking her. The medical bills began to pile up like a mountain. Caleb didn't have the luxury of finding himself. He was turned professional not for the fame, but because he needed the press money to keep Aaliyah's life support machines running. He wasn't fighting for a belt. He was fighting for more minutes with his daughter. Chapter 4. The Dual Life. For 19 months, Caleb Plant lived in two different worlds, and both were defined by pain. In one world, he was a rising star in the gym, moving with a fluid, beautiful grace that earned him the nickname. He was the sweet hands sensation, a man who looked like he didn't have a care in the world when he was under the bright lights of the ring. But the moment the gloves were off, he was back in the sterile, fluorescent lit hallways of the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. He smelled like gym sweat and hospital antiseptic. He lived out of a gym bag and a hospital chair. He would spar 12 rounds with the world-class athletes and then spend 12 hours holding his daughter's hands, praying for a miracle that the doctor said wasn't coming. He saw her go through brain surgeries, lung collapses, and countless setbacks. He would watch his daughter's heart monitor, rhythmic beep, and realize that it was the only timer that mattered. Far more than a boxing bell. He wasn't just fighting men in leather gloves. He was fighting God, fate, and biology. Chapter 5. The Night the World Ended. January 29, 2015, the call came. The one every parent fears in their deepest marrow of their bones. Aaliyah's respiratory system was failing for the last time. Caleb sat by her bed, the beeping of the monitors, the only sound in the room. He whispered to her, telling her that it was okay to let go, that she didn't have to fight anymore. He took the weight of the world off her tiny shoulders and placed it on his own. He promised her right there and then, as her heart slowed to a stop, that he would take her name to the top of the boxing world. When she passed, a part of Caleb died in the hospital. The grief wasn't the wave, it was an ocean. But Caleb did something that horrified and confused many. He went to the gym the following Monday. He didn't go to the gym because he was heartless. He went because the gym was the only place where the world made sense. The heavy bag didn't ask questions. The rhythm of the speed bag drowned out the silence of the hospital room. He had buried his daughter, and now he has to keep the promise he made to her. Chapter 6. The Triumph vs. Uzcategui. On January 13, 2019, the world finally saw what the pain had built. Standing across from the heavy-hitting champion, Jose Uzcategui, Caleb was a massive underdog. Uzcategui was a boogeyman, a man known for breaking bones and spirits. But you cannot intimidate a man who has watched his child die. The fight was a masterclass of psychological and physical dominance. In the second round, Plant caught Uzcategui with a left hook that didn't just land, it exploded. The champion hit the floor, and the world gasped. In the fourth round, it happened again. But the true triumph wasn't the knockdowns, it was the late rounds. Plant suffered a gruesome cut over his eye. Blood masked his vision and a red veil over his dream. Uzcategui searched, smelling blood. This was where the childhood in the trailer and the nights in the ICU surfaced. Most fighters would have wilted under the pressure of a champion's assault. but Caleb has survived worse than a punch. He used his sweet hands to navigate the storm, boxing with surgical composure that made the champion look amateur. When the final bell rang, Caleb didn't pump his fists. He fell to his knees and sobbed into the canvas. The IBF world title was his. The promise was kept. Aaliyah was a world champion. Chapter 7. The Final Cruelty. In boxing, they say, you're never more vulnerable than the moment after you win. For Caleb, the universe had one last blow to land. Only weeks after his greatest triumph, his mother, Beth Plant, was involved in a tragic encounter. She was struggling with mental health issues and addiction, a byproduct of the same hard life that had shaped Caleb's childhood. During an incident with law enforcement, she was shot and killed. The irony was sickening. He had finally made enough money to take care of everyone. He had the belt, he had the fame, he had reached the summit, only to look back and see his mother taken away by the very streets he thought he had finally escaped. He had to trade his celebrity parade for a funeral procession. He buried his mother under the glare of a national media, his private agony once again becoming a public spectacle. Chapter 8. The Legacy of a Survivor. Caleb Plant's story isn't a sports story, it's a survival story. When you see him walk in the ring today, you aren't seeing a boxer, you are seeing a man who has been stripped of everything a human being holds dear and still refused to break. He didn't turn to the drugs that haunted his town. He didn't let the bitterness of losing a child turn him into a monster. Instead, he channeled that raw, bleeding emotion into a craft of pure elegance. He carries Aaliyah and Beth in every step he takes. His sweet hands are a contradiction, the soft touch of a technician used to survive the hardest life imaginable. He is a reminder that you can be shattered into a million pieces and still find a way to put yourself back together. Not as you were, but as something stronger, harder, and more beautiful than before. Yo guys, thank you for listening to Boxing History Untold. Give it a like, comment, share, and subscribe if you like our content, and let us know in the comments who you'd like to hear about in the next story. Thank you very much and have a good one.